Hello everybody and welcome to this amazing killer tier list for Dead by Daylight. A few notes regarding this tier list before we begin. First, I want to note there's going to be a massive change to Dead by Daylight coming here shortly, but when that update comes, I'm not exactly sure. It shouldn't come any sooner than the next couple of weeks, but I'm expecting maybe a month or two. That upcoming update is called the Emblem update. Essentially, it changes how both survivors and killers win, which completely alter this tier list. The game will no longer be about strictly killing survivors, which will change the favor of the game to several other killers as well. The update, however, will not affect how we gain blood points, just how we gain pips, and this tier list is typically considered the killer who can get the most pips, which is equivalent to the most kills. And first on to this list of killers, it's ranked from highest to lowest, strength and viability, while in a trial for getting kills. This being said, these comparisons of power are my opinion and formed through over 1,000 hours of play. The list is here to help you identify the strengths and weaknesses of killers and understand why I would label them the way I do in small summaries. Second, this list is only valid up to patch 1.9.1. Any changes after this patch have not been considered, meaning if killers were to be reworked or balanced, then the new list would have to be released due to discussing any of the changes that would affect killers' locations on this tier list. And finally, let's discuss the tier list and how it is set up. First, this isn't a MOBA or fighter game that has some extreme in-depth gameplay. Instead, there are 3 tiers to worry about. The top tier that will contain the best killers in the game that pose the most threat to survivors even without add-ons. These will be the killers with the tool that possesses a serious threat to survivors at all times. The mid-tier are the killers that have tools that assist in catching the survivors and are of average power. However, unlike the high-tier killers, they have plenty of counterplay that gives survivors plenty of chances to surviving, leaving these killers technically balanced by the average standard. Low-tier killers are essentially baseline or worse killers. Their tools may consist of some form of utility or tracking, however during a chase they're typically helpless to the various tools of survivors, or even have a hindering tool or lower overall stats. Now, I've been rewriting the script so much and so often, I've come to terms with having to make a video for each individual killer, but I'll likely get to this once the Emblem update is done and correct the changes to the list at that time, and it is very hard to really cover everything as to why I put them on this list, being there are 11 killers. So instead, just accept these small summaries to my thoughts, and I'll release the future videos that tie into this, that fully explain in depth with add-ons, perks, every individual item, strategies that would otherwise work. After writing out 3 different killers, it got up to an hour and a half of just explanations, and that just wasn't going to work out for me. So let's reveal the tier list. We've listed the killers in their proper categories, top tier, mid tier, low tier, and then designated them from better killers on the left side to the lesser killers on the right side. We'll begin covering the killers from top left as the best killer in the game to bottom right as the worst killer in the game. The number 1 killer on our list is Nurse, and who didn't see this coming? As the only killer with a seemingly endless skill cap, the Nurse is capable of ignoring any if not all survivor defenses. Spencer's last breath, also known as Blink, is her tool of choice which grants some of the most impressive plays when used in the right hands. So what's the skill cap? The skill cap is a limit that killers have that determines how good a killer can be from the skill of the player. Most killers fall short on this list due to having a low skill cap, meaning that no matter how good that player got, they're limited by the killer that prevents them from doing better than they normally could due to the mechanics the killer has. The Nurse, however, is one of the few that is hard to determine how high this cap is because of how well she does to ignore pallets, windows, and even elevation. If you seek the best possible outcome in your trials, the Nurse is the most rewarding to the skilled players. Of course, she may not be very powerful in the hands of those who just start the game, but this list is about the potential of all killers, and each killer requires just a bit of skill to perform well, but since her blinks can be very decisive in a chase, I have to put her on the top as the strongest killer of Dead by Daylight. On top of all of this, the Nurse is a strong killer even without add-ons. In fact, some would even go so far as to say that add-ons make her more difficult to play, changing the blinks too much. Yet if you think about it, since she can be devastating without add-ons, she continues to prove that she can spike her power by adding additional chain blinks or even reducing the blink fatigue. She's just too damn terrifying. As an additional note, I am also aware that she is limited on some maps. However, I still believe that even with those limitations on the blink, since she can't go through certain objects, she is still terrifying in the right hands that know not to blink in those locations and outplay the survivor to prevent them from going to those locations. The nurse has the highest skill cap but is not the easiest to learn, and she can be more frustrating than ever. Either way, frustration isn't what this list is about, it's about the potential, and the nurse has the best potential. Number 2 on the list is Hillbilly. It should be undeniable due to the amount of Hillbilly killers we see at rank 1 that he deserves at least the second spot for most powerful killer. But why not the first? The Hillbilly has a chainsaw, a very versatile weapon that holds the most utility and power in this game. However, even with this vast utility, it cannot exactly ignore pallets, walls, or obstacles that would otherwise block this monstrous weapon. Even with its small limitation, the chainsaw is overwhelming in what it can do, and the Hillbilly holds a high skill cap with such versatility. First, the chainsaw has mobility that doubles his 115% movement speed to 230, which allows him to travel twice as fast as any other killer for as long as he has a path to sprint. Heck, this almost makes Hillbilly scary since he can control generators relatively faster than any other character in the game. Then, looking at the chainsaw as a potential weapon, it's undeniably the most devastating, allowing for power that instantly downs the survivor. Some killers have to rely on perks like No One Escapes Death or Devour Hope, or even Make Your Choice, yet the Hillbilly is granted a weapon that provides this effect with ease and endless use. The chainsaw itself isn't terribly a difficult tool to use either. There are some easy tricks to make it easy to land the attack, helping secure quick kills and relieving the stress of having to chase for long times, risking the quick generator repair known as the gen rush. Close the gap and charge the chainsaw. It should help secure some of the easiest hits in the game and help Billy snowball early in the match. Hillbilly not only has a high skill cap, but is easy to pick up once a killer is familiar with the basics of just being a killer. Utility is not limited to movement either. Capable of breaking pallets is another great tool, as he doesn't have to slow down to use anything to break pallets other than his chainsaw if timed correctly without add-ons, and, well, is mindless with add-ons. Speaking of add-ons, the chainsaw is not the easiest to use it just takes some practice to understand the timing so that you can judge whether or not it's a good idea to charge the chainsaw, but it's not difficult once you know the timing and where you can use it in certain loops. His add-ons, however, are undoubtedly some of the most powerful and useful. Creating an extremely low charge time can cause any unprepared survivor to drop in a matter of a second. With various effects he can also apply, or even combining his add-ons with perks such as Tinker, only helps to heighten this threat level. With that being said, that should help you determine why Hillbilly is at least rank 2, if not rank 1. A lot of other tier lists, or people's opinion, should match to Nurse or Hillbilly being number 1, but Hillbilly falls just slightly short since the Nurse can be pretty broken in terms of being able to just ignore mechanics of this game overall. And for the final top killer is the Shape. Now, hold on before you hit that dislike button and go to the comments to disagree immediately about this and that your Huntress or Doctor did not make it up here. Let's go over it really fast. The potential of Myers is really damn good, and he remains one of the few killers that is always terrifying to play against. His tool is unique and grants stances that no other killer has, while also gaining benefits that no other killer gets. That makes him relatively devastating at any point in the game. As for why Huntress and Doctor are not up here, we'll get to that when we get to them, but for now, let's talk about Myers. Just like most killers, Myers suffers from lacking any utility to stop the almighty pallets from survivors. The Shape does come with a few gimmicks that play very well for the killer. First, in Tier 1 of Evil Within, he holds the smallest terror radius of killers, but also is relatively slow at a 103.5% movement speed in comparison to the 115 usual. His lunge is even shorter, and the potential he has is great, as he can sneak up on survivors and pull them off of generators, eliminating a chase and getting an easy hook for the early game. Even if survivors are too aware of his presence, Evil Within 2 turns Myers into a normal killer. His speed is up to the usual 115, but his terror radius is actually half of that of a normal killer, locking in at 16 meters. This helps mask his presence and allows him to close in on unsuspecting survivors while also being capable of landing early attacks that end the chase faster. Evil Within 3 is the unique power that grants the Shape powers that no other killer gets. First, his terror radius is increased to match normal killers at 32 meters. Next, his attacks while in this stance now instantly downs survivors, while also extending the lunge range, making Myers one of 2 killers that have an extended lunge. Additionally, he gains a mobility buff that allows him to vault through windows faster than any other killer in the game. This helps to remove large loops that survivors would usually run and help close that gap even faster. The only defense a survivor has against this monster are pallets. If there are a slew of pallets nearby, they can easily fend off an evil within 3 Myers until it fades out. The Shape, however, can choose to unleash his power when he pleases, as he can stockpile it to at least 99% and then unleash it at his own whim. Myers without his add-ons is still very playable, however you'll just have to manage the evil within as a priority, and keep it in stock at crucial moments of killing multiple survivors. Myers is capable of downing several survivors at once, making his altruism damning for survivors that play against him. Putting add-ons on him makes him even more terrifying, as the time required to stalk opponents is heavily reduced, allowing him to hit evil within in just a matter of seconds. This goes without mentioning that he's the only killer capable of outright eliminating survivors from even a healthy state, as the proper add-ons can immediately kill them if he enters tier 3. There are also add-ons that make evil within permanent, and at his best, Myers is near unstoppable, and he is very comparable to Hillbilly and Nurse. Yet because of his weaker base set, he's not nearly as strong or mobile as the top 2 killers, leaving him as number 3 on our list. So Huntress was a no-brainer for number 4. She's without a doubt powerful, I'm not going to deny that, but what made this part difficult was determining whether or not she was top tier or very well balanced. Huntress has the only projectile attack in the game with her hatchets, which can be extremely devastating. However, because she is capable of harming survivors at a distance, she was also slowed at base speed compared to other killers, clocking in at 110%, which is 5% slower than the base killer speed. Due to this, the Huntress finds herself a few more weaknesses than other top tier killers. Loops with large walls, large debris, or even vehicles cause a problem, as survivors can typically make an additional loop without the worry of hatchets. With that being said, she does gain different advantages against survivors, as she is capable of striking over pallets, through windows, and, well, at nearly any distance. The Huntress is another killer with amazingly high skill caps, since she requires a skilled player to understand the physics of her hatchets, how long to charge them for the results she'll want. Huntress will also have to worry about attempting to predict the survivor's movements, as she'll have to sometimes lead the shot. Setting up for clear shots is important and not always up to the Huntress to make. At her base, her hatchets aren't that fast on windup or cooldown, and it can be damning to miss the hatchets, and even worse if she were to run out. Chasing survivors without hatchets is a bad idea, since she is no better than a baseline killer. In fact, she's worse. With some add-ons, she could pump herself into some devastating territory, though. Undoubtedly, iridescent heads, the one-shot hatchets, before their nerf would have easily put Huntress into top tier and one of the most powerful killers in the game, but now that they nerfed that and reduced the iridescents, are pretty manageable as a survivor. She only gets 1 and up to 3 with the infantry belt. She works well with wind-up reduction that help her throw hatchets faster and kills the survivors quickly. Hell, her hatchets are even allowed some amazing basement defense, as you won't want to be caught down there while she waits at the top to get a few free kills. The only limit to the Huntress is that a skilled survivor can make some pretty decent counterplay, and there are quite a few maps that don't favor her due to the amount of walls or large areas that can be looped. She belongs in the mid-tier simply because she is well balanced. She's not overwhelming as a killer, but she is terrifying. Huntress should be what other killers are balanced around, truthfully. A killer that has a tool that absolutely helps during the chase, while also capable of performing normal actions. Add-ons only help to increase this threat level, and I believe that other killers should be capable of the similar feats as the Huntress. Another reason I chose the mid-tier is because she has one of the largest notifications of her direction that no other killer suffers. She has a lullaby radius. This radius cannot be increased or decreased, and it is also directional. If a survivor listens to this, they know exactly where she's coming from. This helps them sneak around her, especially with urban evasion. There's so much a survivor could do to stealth around the Huntress that she might not be a problem without her running some type of tracking perks. With that being said, she does make up with her projectiles, which is why I deem her very well balanced and not top tier, but a very good killer nonetheless. Cannibal is our 5th killer, as he finds himself at a decent balance. Unlike Hillbilly, his weapon does not provide as many uses, which is kind of funny since the Hillbilly is designed after Leatherface, the Cannibal. Yet there are a few things the Leatherface does have that's provided for the communicability as well as boosting a relatively interesting playstyle. For our dearest Leatherface, he introduced us to barbecue and chili, possibly one of the most powerful tracking perks for Hillbilly and Nurse. He also has a variant chainsaw that can strike multiple survivors multiple times, helping to negate borrowed time and any altruism while he is near the hook. However, though his defenses may be great and near unbreakable, his offense is just a bit lacking, and that helps to balance him out a bit. The offense is a bit slow, but in the right circumstance it can grant him an instant down. Any survivor caught in the open without a window or pallet will end up finding themselves in range of the chainsaw. Leatherface finds himself struggling against sprint bursts as it helps keep survivors in a safe distance while also being able to reach safe areas quickly. Still, the Cannibal can chase just as any other killer would, and he has the baseline speed and tear radius of a normal killer. He has a few weaknesses that put him lower on the top killers, as he has very few ways of overcoming these challenges. His chainsaw attack itself is a bit risky, since colliding into objects will cause him to enter a tantrum where the killer will be stuck in an animation for a good while, giving the survivors ample time to escape the chase. The tantrum can, however, still harm survivors in close quarters and has some use, but it's not likely they'll run into the chainsaw attack intentionally. Leatherface is our first killer who begins to show a lower skill cap than the other killers already mentioned. There's very little he can do against window loops, as windows serve as his primary weakness, an endless supply of safety for survivors. He'll be left to use his mace to land quick attacks towards the windows. Unless Leatherface can begin with an early kill, he'll find himself in a tight spot since he won't be able to snowball without his defense. At an exit gate or hatch, his chainsaw is also a bit slow. Downing someone at the gate can leave them with enough time to crawl out, since Leatherface is doomed to watch the remainder of his animation play out regardless of a successful hit or not. At the base, Leatherface is about as average as he can be, and his add-ons make him more viable but don't show a drastic difference like the Hillbilly does. The charge time reduction is always lovely, but since his mobility isn't very good, he'll likely still struggle just walking around as a base killer. Leatherface finds himself in the mid-tier since he can maintain a threat of instant death during chase, which puts the pressure on survivors, but an improper map of Pallet City or tons of windows will keep Leatherface at bay for 5 generators without ruin. Our newest killer to the game of Dead by Daylight finds herself at number 6, the Pig. She doesn't find herself with much strength, sadly, but she is a very unique killer. She is the only killer with a unique attack and a tool built in one. She manages her crouch state that reduces her tear radius to 0 and perform an extended lunge while also capable of placing reverse bear traps on dying survivors. Amanda Young, or the Pig, is put here at 6 and she's relatively lacking in power. She has some great stealth tactics that the Wraith should have had from the start, but she is no different than most baseline killers. What puts her higher than the rest of the cream of the crop is the fact that her tool helps extend the duration of the game. Majority of killers struggle for how fast the game can end, and how there is very little stopping the survivors from completing the gens in mere minutes. The Pig, however, remedies this with reverse bear traps. They come in with quite the risk, causing survivors to go out of their way to remove it from their head. The time cost for this is, however, not always guaranteed to be high, but the time is helpful in causing some disruption regardless of how little or large it is. Her stealth and ambush are pretty useful too, as she is able to sneak up on the survivors. Currently, her lunge attack is bugged, giving survivors an early warning that she is preparing to lunge before she actually makes the attack. Once this is cleared up, the lunge will be a bit more successful. Yet even now, it is pretty hard to get off if survivors see you there, since they'll get double the warning. This has been confirmed by the developers to be a bug, and they will be fixing it. Although the stealth would seem extremely helpful, her camera does seem to pan a little low in the grass, which makes it hard for the Pig to even see her surroundings. Her movement speed during the crouch is also heavily reduced to 92%, and she has a normal speed of 115 when walking. Overall, Amanda is a fun killer. At base, she poses a time waster, but with add-ons, she doesn't get that much stronger. They can help change how she plays, but she typically gains more tools to waste time more than anything else, leaving her a bit underwhelming. But she does find herself balanced in the mid-tier, since her tools do exist to prolong the game, and she does have some unique play behind her stealth mechanics. Moving on to number 7, and the last killer of the mid-tier is the Trapper. And he was a tough one when reviewing him since he has a potential to do well, but it all relies on the survivors. Any Survive with Friends group can easily bully the Trapper, but no one can deny that when done correctly, the Trapper can wipe entire teams. Trapper finds himself here at the low end of mid-tier as other killers with better balance have been released, but he was once the most powerful killer as he was capable of camping hooks like no other. Before the days of swivel hooks that would allow you to save at any angle, traps used to be able to be placed at the feet of hooked survivors. From there, if a trap was not disarmed, they trapped the survivor who was unlucky enough to make an attempt at a quick save. Yet that's the past and we're in 1.9.1 right now, and looking at the Trapper, I deem him at the baseline of all killers. Anything less than the Trapper is a lower level killer. He struggles since he must spend his early game preparing the field. If he fails to set up traps, he is no better than the baseline killer. It is crucial to get his traps in chokeholds and well-hidden points of tall grass. Not all maps benefit him nearly as much as others, but keeping yourself unpredictable will help pay off in the long run. Even with a skilled killer driving the Trapper, trap placements can be easily detected and countered. Any survivor that would follow the Trapper can also demolish any setup the Trapper sets, leaving him relatively frustrated. Yet if the Trapper were to get a basement hook, the defensive game can be on point to prevent stealthy survivors from making any rash saves without risking themselves from getting out of the basement. Trapper is also capable of halting any long loops with a proper setup, yet because we find him lower on the totem of the pole of mid-tier, his tool can't assist him in the middle of the chase if he were to fail to properly set up at the start of the game. His add-ons just continue to make him a better killer, but nothing that pushes him as high as Hillbilly, Myers, Huntress, or practically anyone above him. Very much like Amanda Young, he suffers from add-ons that definitely make him more usable with better utility, but nothing more frightening except for a diamond bar, but that's only if they run into the trap itself, and that's why we find the Trapper here at the low end. To begin our journey in the low tier, we find the Doctor at number 8 on this list, and I know, you all love the Doctor and hate to play against him. His tracking tools are so good, I hear you say, and that's just where I begin to disagree. Tracking tools in this game of Dead by Daylight are not nearly as powerful as anything that could just damage survivors from the killers in the mid-tier, or well, especially the top tier. The Doctor does not find himself with the tools necessary to damage survivors. Instead, he is strictly stuck to tracking, although I will give credit where credit is due and admit the Doctor being capable of finding survivors the fastest with great accuracy is pretty beneficial. Yet that's just where I begin to draw the line. Once a survivor enters Tier 1 of Madness, you'll never be able to guarantee that quick find again, and you'll only be able to find them once you raise their madness to a second level. So since the survivor would enter Tier 1 madness and you track them, there's no way to guarantee that you get that same effect again as stated before, especially if all the survivors run into your terror radius and get Tier 1 madness as fast as they can, so you can't track them later. This becomes very hindering to the Doctor, as they may get a slight hindrance of a 33% random skill check, but then again, you can't track them nearly as strong as you could without proper add-ons. The skill cap for Doctor is pretty low. He can only do as well as the survivors let him. His tools to serve interruption against the survivors works moderately well, but with some heavy flaws. Very much like the pig, it can cause the survivor to waste time to have to snap out of it, but the problem is, the Doctor also has to waste his own time during a chase to apply shock to survivors in order to get them to Madness 3 faster. All other killers above the Doctor on this list typically do not just waste time with their power, however find themselves ending chases sooner than they normally would have to. The Doctor, on the other hand, actually has to spend time to gain the benefits of madness and shock them into the various tiers, and then also apply 2 basic hits that would down them on the ground. The Doctor at base level has very minimal benefits of Madness Tier 3. It does require add-ons to truly bring out his real potential. Newer players may struggle from the Doctor as they don't understand how to play against him or how he works, which is where you'll hear a lot of the complaints against the Doctor and why he's so powerful. Those who do not understand how to play against him will easily succumb to the madness and play into what otherwise is an easy mechanic to play around, very much like Freddy. Truthfully, there's just so much to discuss on the various little bits of the Doctor, as he is an interesting and intricate killer and is not any less than a baseline killer, but his tool absolutely does not help him kill faster, it just helps to interrupt survivors and track them. This comes with various flaws that we can discuss in the video that will be released in the future. Since the Doctor has a power that doesn't really help all that much in a chase, that's why he's low on my list. He's in the low tier because his power does not exactly help with the chase. It has the potential to prevent survivors from jumping over windows and pallets and dropping pallets if they are shocked at a proper time. The downfall to this is that a shock slows the killer down. By making a shock, he puts a gap between him and the survivor. For as long as the survivor doesn't stop running, he does not exactly close the gap for as long as the survivor does not run away from a safe location. He can just continue the loop. And for as long as he continues that loop and the Doctor continues to shock him, that gap is endless and the Doctor will never catch up. The Doctor will just have to swap forms. And with add-ons, if he extends the range of his shock, it slows him down for even longer to do a longer charge, which means a bigger gap can be made no matter the distance, leaving the Doctor to be just a baseline killer after madness is applied. So what ends up putting him here on the highest of the low tier is he is a decent killer. He is capable of doing things, he has some interesting plays, but he does have his limitations. A survivor who knows how to play against a Doctor will put him down, which is why we don't see him too often in rank 1, and when we do, it can be kinda laughable. So with my experience and my knowledge of playing against a Doctor while also playing as the Doctor, without the add-ons it's a bit rough, and with the add-ons it's not that much better. He doesn't get that much more powerful, he's just annoying. As we begin winding down to the last 3, Hag falls onto number 9 of our list. Hag is easily one of the lesser killers in this game since she lacks any decent offense. Much like the Huntress, Hag suffers from lesser movement speed at 110%, but unlike the Huntress, she does not have projectile attacks. Instead, she's very much like the Trapper. This combination of Huntress speed and Trapper playstyle is not exactly favorable for her, as she has to set up in order to utilize her tools, just like the Trapper. The Hag suffers from slower movement speed, making it takes her longer to travel to the areas in order to even begin her setups by 5%. Additionally, her traps do not guarantee hits, and she must teleport them and also be in range of the trap to teleport to said trap. Due to this, her traps are a bit more limited than the Trapper, as he can instead down survivors without having to be at the trap itself with proper add-ons. The Hag does get a slight benefit from all this, though she does have a smaller tear radius and body compared to other killers. The body does cause her camera to pan a bit lower, meaning it can be more difficult to see through things like corn and over tall debris, but I'm not sure we can really consider the smaller body to be a plus if she can hide behind it but also can't see the survivors nearly as well as the taller killers. At base, the Hag is honestly not much of a threat. Her true power shines when she finally catches a survivor, as she's got one of the best, if not the best, defensive game capability of preventing altruism through her traps. Though Leatherface can face camp a hook like nobody's business, Hag is capable of defending hooks while also protecting generators nearby. This being said, the traps do come with a variety of weaknesses that make them easily to be avoided or destroyed by survivors, as they might just intentionally sprint through all of them while you're busy making interactions such as carrying a survivor to a hook or even in midst of a chase. The traps can also be avoided by sneaking past them in a crouch state, which urban evasion makes this relatively easy to do, and flashlights just outright destroy the trap. Something I want to bring up on this tier list is that in the comment section of my videos while making this list and script, was someone who would challenge that I would put the Hag on the lower end of my tier list, and he's right, I absolutely did. And he thought it was because, just like everyone else, I would claim that she is only good for camping. And though yes, nobody can deny how good her defenses are, you can't exactly tell me she's got any good offense. She is essentially a lesser Trapper, and her only redeeming quality is the Hex Ruin perk, as it has become a staple for all killers, and you don't even have to play her to get that perk, so she's just there to give us Hex Ruin, and that's about it. I don't particularly enjoy playing her due to her slower speed and the amount of loops you can be taken through, just like the Huntress. And like I said, you can place traps, but survivors can also avoid traps, and there's no projectile, no forcing of these without the proper add-ons. And if I don't focus all my points into this killer in order to get these add-ons, I'm stuck at a dead end. So at base we can see that she falls below a baseline killer as she is slower, but then let's look at her add-ons. There are some interesting styles of play you can get with her, having traps that are relatively invisible, or even being able to teleport to any trap regardless if it's been popped. But with that being said, looking at the baseline, she's still just not that good. Even with her add-ons, some of them hinder her speed even further, and that looks bad on us as a hag. However, she is only third worst killer. She does have slower speed, she is worse than a baseline killer, but she does have some interesting plays with her traps. She can teleport, she can outmaneuver, the setup could be done correctly, and with that, it comes with a relatively higher skill cap, but still limited to what the mechanics of the nurse can do. It's not nearly as high as other killers, but it is not nearly as worse as the other two killers to come. Taking up our 10th spot is the door-to-door salesman, ding-dong, bing-bong, Wraith. For so long he held the crown for worst killer of Dead by Daylight, but he finally gained his buff, and that buff came in the form of Freddy, an even worse killer. However, that's for the next slot to discuss, so let's get through the Wraith. For beginners, the Wraith is meant to be a stealth hunter who has a tool to assist in tracking instead of a chase, very much like the Doctor. However, the Doctor's tool is far more accurate and useful in comparison to the Wraith. The Wraith might be able to travel with no terror radius and a faster speed and find unsuspecting survivors, but they are given ample warning of his arrival once he begins to ring the bell to come out of invisibility. Unlike the pig, the Wraith is unable to strike out of stealth or interact with survivors. He can break pallets and he can break generators, but he's unable to pull survivors off of the generator itself if they're working on it, or a totem. He must exit stealth instead. And what this does is gives the survivor a ample amount of time to get to a pallet window or begin running. Typically with sprint bursts would put them enough ahead of the Wraith that they don't have to worry. The sad thing about this is that the Wraith is literally the baseline killer. Outside of his stealth, he can only chase and attack. Going into stealth is not particularly the greatest idea unless a Wraith is trying to get benefits off of Windstorm, one of his add-ons, which would make him faster upon unstealthing, but of course that add-on also increases the reappearance time from 3 seconds to higher depending on which Windstorm they use. That being said, he relies on perks more than anything in comparison to the pig, who has reverse bear traps to waste time, a lunge that is far more reliable than unstealthing and striking, and the Doctor, who has also his own tracking tools that also stun survivors from jumping through windows and over pallets. The Wraith really has nothing. The Wraith is so bare minimum, that is why he has fallen to the worst killer in the game for so long. The funny part about this whole story is I remember when beginning this game when it first came out, we all thought the Wraith was so powerful because we didn't know he was coming, and that would always screw us over. Baseline killers would always defeat us when we didn't know how to play as a survivor, but now that we have the tools to defend ourselves as survivors, he's a joke. Because he does nothing more than any other killer. Once you are in his terror radius, you know to keep running, and when you know it's gone, you know to keep your eye out for this invisible blob that might be walking towards your direction, and if it does, it will not interact with you until the terror radius is revealed. That being said, he does rely heavily on Noed, which is typically predictable, being he needs this crutch in order to secure a few kills at the end. Therefore, survivors usually pick up on this and eliminate his only strength, which is finding people and downing them instantly, since it can almost be guaranteed they run Noed, so they sometimes might stop running Noed to avoid having a useless perk. Overall, I love the Wraith. His tracking tool is okay and did receive a quality of life buff recently that increases the brightness of blood if you happen to lose a survivor that you struck, but to be honest, you rarely will. But when you do, you might be able to track their blood. It does disappear relatively fast, and then when you do find them, they have ample time to keep running, and you get the loop. You get this process of this is a killer who just chases and strikes and has no tools to assist him during the chase other than to find people. You might as well play the doctor, that way you can actually buy yourself some time and put them into a madness instead of just relying on them to just, well, not finish the gens for some reason, which they likely will, but oh man, there's so much to cover with the Wraith. I gotta leave it here, but he needs a buff so badly. Last but not least, oh boy, the Nightmare is the worst killer of Dead by Daylight. Freddy Krueger has seen so much shit in his short time of being here with us on Dead by Daylight, I don't even know where to begin. Typically, baseline killers are just capable of having the 115% movement speed, terror radius, and can just strike survivors. That's what we expect from every killer. Any killer unable to interact with survivors is just guaranteed to be instantly worse. Freddy is that killer. He cannot harm or interact with any survivor who is not asleep. They must first be sleeping in order to be interacted with, therefore he cannot strike them. He is the only killer who cannot do anything without his tool, to which puts survivors to sleep up until they are either woken up or fail a skill check on a repair or self-care. Putting survivors to sleep takes 7 seconds at base. Of course, with add-ons you can decrease the time, but overall, it's 7 seconds. 7 seconds of not being able to do anything immediately hinders Freddy. So there obviously must be some positive gain to this, right? To help balance him out with the other killers. And I suppose it's that the survivors are now highlighted with a blue aura, making it easier for them to see through corn or at a distance. And if they exit his terror radius, their aura is revealed to where they are. And that's about it. In truth, the pros and cons to his power are just mostly cons. There's some benefits to be had, and he is only strong at the end game. One of the best benefits is putting all survivors to sleep, but how easy it is to wake up from sleep is ridiculous as long as you have a generator or the survivor is injured. Freddy is very powerful at the end game, for as long as he is capable of having everyone asleep with no generators to wake a survivor up on, and they are all not injured to self-care from, and all of them are asleep. If one is awake, they can wake up the rest, which makes Freddy absolutely useless. If Freddy were to walk up on anyone destroying a hex totem, finishing off a last second generator just seconds away from opening the door, if the 7 seconds don't put them into the sleep realm before they are complete, they can absolutely finish the task at hand and ultimately screw Freddy over. Not to mention putting survivors on a hook instantly wakes them up, meaning that Freddy can't immediately kill them once they get off the hook. He has to wait till they fall back asleep once they're saved. And this also means that if someone comes to make the save without being asleep, he must wait the time for them to fall asleep in order to prevent them from making the hook, but that's nigh impossible unless he has the best add-ons that make him relatively decent. Freddy is so situational that there is a very low skill cap. There's only so much Freddy can do in a game that Freddy relies on know-it and very gimmicky setups in order to work at all. Of course, poor survivors can feed into any killer. That's not what I'm going to argue here. Instead, I'm going to argue that if the best survivors were put against Freddy and Freddy was the best killer of the game, the survivors would come out on top. Easily. Oh, but he has indefinite Deerstalker. Well, that's not exactly true. Having Deerstalker is one thing that helps you track people on the ground, but if those people get up or are healed, they're immediately woken up. Even if they were to be healed by someone who is sleeping, even though it happens at half the speed, then they wake up and can wake up the person who healed them and they can get away from you. The 7 seconds that it takes to transition is also not a free hit. Some would argue that once they're put asleep and as soon as they fall asleep they're given a free hit to Freddy, but that's not the case. As long as you're near a pallet or a window, you can prevent that free hit supposedly from happening. It's no different from any other killer just approaching you and smacking you upside the head. If you are not in a safe spot, you are going to get smacked upside your head for being stupid. Stupid. Freddy does come with one very powerful perk. Remember Me. This is a perk that demolishes anyone unprepared to open an exit gate at 30 additional seconds. Remember Me is such a wonderful perk that every time you strike your obsession with damage, you gain a token. For every token, it increases the time it takes to open an exit gate by 5 seconds. A total of 6 tokens, 30 seconds. That's more than double of the base time it takes to open a door, which is only 20 seconds. But other than that, he's shit. He's the worst. And the worst part is, he got nerfed. He got nerfed because people just didn't understand. He was already pretty bad, and he was already contesting for one of the worst killers, but people just couldn't fathom or understand how to fight him. They didn't like that they couldn't see him. They didn't like that being asleep slowed you down, but they also didn't realize how easy it is to wake up, how easy it is to just perform altruism acts right in front of him, how easy it is to get around him, especially since they allow you to know who is asleep, which wasn't the case originally, which was a very powerful asset that prevented him from being the worst killer, but now he's just outright the worst. I would absolutely argue that this is fact over a subjective matter. Having 7 seconds away from being a baseline killer, there's just nothing else that could defend him. He is slower than all other killers, and for all survivors to ever fall to him, it's kind of laughable. The survivors would at that point have made too many mistakes that any killer in the game would have finished them all off. And well, with that being said, that wraps up the list, and that shows us who our worst killer is, Freddy Krueger. Well, there you have it, my personal tier list for killers of Dead by Daylight. This list was huge, and having to tackle all the killers in the way that I didn't give me enough time to cover everything about them and why they're really here. If you want to, please list down below the killer you want a further explanation of that dives more into detail about why I put them there and all of their faults and benefits. How does this list compare to yours? Let me know. Did this change any of your minds as to where you think the killers belong, or do you just simply disagree? Either way, I'll look forward to reading all of your replies. Thank you all for watching. I owe you all a great deal, and I'm happy to make videos that would help you all achieve your own goals and teach you a bit about Dead by Daylight. Don't forget to share, like, and subscribe, and as always, good game!